Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Black Writers Read, which may, for me, be a little struggle bus. Because for those who have been joining us for the past month or so, I'm still recovering from COVID. I've been negative for a while, but I have a really horrible cough and I've had it for a bit. But we are going to do this tonight. I'm not going to let the Rona take over my life. So thank you all for joining us today. Today is episode 4 of season 3 of Black Writers Read. I am Nicole Young Martin, and I am the producer, host, and founder of the series. And I am coming to you from my home office in Northern Connecticut. Um, like I said before, I am still recovering from COVID, but I'm going to make it through. I'm probably high as a kite right now on tons of prescription, over the counter medicine, and holistic stuff to get me through this. For those who have been following me for some time, I recorded my album extremely sick and I made it through. So we're going to do this now. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind the scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted over 40 authors representing various genres, including children's books, young adult fiction, poetry, urban creative nonfiction, memoir, history, horror, essays, food, and culture from around the globe, including Western Massachusetts, Maryland, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., upstate New York, Vermont, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Portugal, and Jacksonville, Florida. Today, I am proud to add the Midwest. What up, though? Chicago on this list. Today, we are joined by poet and educator Dr. Tara Betts. For people who know, I am from Detroit. I'm a proud Midwesterner, and I have family roots in Chicago on both sides of my family. So it is so amazing to be joined today by someone who is from my favorite American city. We'll be talking today about Tara's latest poetry collection, Refuse to Disappear. Published in July, Refuse to Disappear is a new collection singing the survival and thriving of Black women, chosen by Cynthia Araru King for the Hilary Tham Capital Collection. I want to share with you, and I proudly have the book. I want to share with you one of the quotes that was written by a phenomenal, very well acclaimed poet and educator, Cornelius Eady, who offers something of an opening to what this book is about. What a revelation. And Refuse to Disappear, Tara Betts holds fire. Sometimes her poems are like beacons on a darkening day. Sometimes her poems radiate the blaze of Black women's voices then and now, never to be forgotten. Sometimes her lines flame up and unjust history is singed, and you read like you found that friend who puts language to that thing you felt but couldn't put words to, that home fire rescue. I hope y'all already have your copies. And if not, please purchase a copy. This collection is amazing. Tara Betts is the author of Refuse to Disappear, which we'll be talking about this evening, Break the Habit, and Arc in Hue. In addition to her work as a teaching artist and mentor for young poets, she has taught at several universities, including Rutgers University, Northwestern University, University of Illinois Chicago, and at Stateville Prison via the Prison and Neighborhood Arts Project. She is the inaugural poet for the People Practitioner Fellow at University of Chicago. Beth serves as poetry editor at the Langston Hughes Review and is founder of the nonprofit organization, the Whirlwind Learning Center on Chicago's South Side. She wears a lot of hats, y'all. Like, I'm giving her so many flowers tonight. I hope she is ready for the flowers and the glitter. For those who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of our show. First, Tara will read selections from Refuse to Disappear. Afterwards, we'll engage in a conversation, and then we'll open it up to Q&A to all of our viewers if any questions come through. We have viewers joining us from both Facebook and YouTube today. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comments section on the platform where you are joining us from today. I will compile the questions and pose them to Tara following our conversation. Before I bring Tara on to the virtual stage, first I want to give a shout out to Lisa Pegram and her company, Levy Break Lit, for co-presenting today's episode and for introducing me to Tara. Second, it is such an honor to have her on. A couple of days ago, when I announced that she was going to be a guest, I got so many text messages and Facebook messages that were like, "Oh my God, you're finally meeting her. Wow." And I'm like, "Oh my God, she is so connected." So I'm glad that I can now say that I have her as a part of the Black Writers Read community. So let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Tara Bates to the virtual stage. I'm so excited. Good evening.
Hey, I love this little opening effect you have for the show. It looks like we're on CNN or something.
Yeah! I'm Andrea Cooper. Hey, y'all. Yes. So I will turn it over to you. Enjoy.
Well,
You're
oh,
about to read.
oh, is that what I'm gonna do? Okay. Can you tell it's been a long day? So I'll just start with the opening poem and we'll go from there. Hello? Oh, okay. So let's
Yes,
go and
yes.
get into it.
The stage. I can't even talk. The stage is yours.
And do an opening poem or several poems?
What was that?
An opening poem or several poems? I should
You
have
can
asked.
read several poems. Take as much
Oh,
time as you
okay.
need.
Yes. And I'll let you catch a breath.
Yes, thank you.
Um, I'm gonna go ahead and read. I'm gonna try to jump around the book and read something from the earlier part of the book. The book is in 3 sections. I'll read a poem from the first part, poem from the second part, and a poem from the third and final part of the book. And I'll start with this. Uh, this is a poem for Wanda Coleman. If you've never had the chance to meet her, um, this was when I went to Los Angeles and I invited her to a reading, and she actually came to the reading, and I was so floored. And this poem talks a little bit about what we did that night. She came to the reading after. So Roscoe's with Wanda. Los Angeles, let me have a gift. Wanda Coleman asked me where I wanted to go, offered to take me on a tour that started at Viper Room, where River Phoenix crumpled down to his last breath. I didn't want the whole strip, but I said, let's go to Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles, where we sat with our plates. Buckwheat pancakes for me, chicken and waffles for everyone else, since I simply craved a pilgrimage to where the rappers like Tupac shared plates. And I got Wanda with all her words and her voice like a heavy opera. And I got Wanda cussing and laughing, and Wanda talking about mysteries and poems and reading books we couldn't afford to buy, and Vallejo's Trilsa. The thick, tangled branches of her locks, her black jacket veined with bright colors, and flourishes of her hands on outstretched arms, insisting on her worth. And she knew I saw hers, and she saw mine, in spite of all our lumps, without ribbons and bows. Um, the second part of the book is called The Boom Bap, and I just been thinking a lot about this section in particular with everything that's been in the news. But I'm going to read a happier poem that's kind of inspired by Miguel and the song Sure Thing and Erica Badu's Love of My Life, hip hop. It's called Hip Hop Analogies. If you be the needle, I be the LP. If you be the buffed wall, then I be Krylon. If you be the backspin, I be the break. If you be the head nod, I be the bass line. If you be the Philly, I be the razor. If you be microphone, then I be palm. If you be cipher, then I be beatbox. If you be hands thrown up, then I'll be yes, yes, y'all. If you be throwback, then I be remix. If you be footwork, then I be up rock. If you be turntable, then I be crossfader. If you be downtown C train, then I be southbound red line. If you be shell toes, then I be hoodie. If you be freestyle, then I be Peace Book. If you be Sharpie, then I be Tag. If you be Boy, then I be Girl who wants to sync samples into classic. Uh, the last part of the book is a wall is just a wall. Um, and I'm thinking a lot about stuff that happened just prior to the pandemic and how we had all these moments of policing that have been a part of the past. And we had no idea when I finished this book that everything was going to happen with the tragic demise of George Floyd and all the protests that would come after it. But there was a lot leading up to it that made it possible. And I think the way prisons have been run in America have led to that. The way um, Black bodies have been used to build the American economy led up to that. And the last section of the book really makes me think about that when I look at it now. So I'm going to read a poem. It's kind of a long piece. Um, but at the time when I wrote it, there were so many young people writing poems about police brutality and being victims of police brutality and describing those deaths in a way that made me feel like somebody enjoys seeing us die. And I could not stomach seeing those poems anymore. So I said, maybe I want to talk about the fact that I see joy in these communities. And yes, people do get harassed, people do get assaulted, people die at the hands of police every day. But the victories mean so much too. So I'm going to read this poem, and I just wanted to leave that thought in everybody's minds before I read it. An open letter to the voyeurs. I keep trying to write a sentence, simple and clear, but I keep writing the beginnings of poems that process the electricity and extinguishing of human charges, a persistent black light, a startling series of resistant sparks, the flashing clouds of shots fired, puncturing the flesh that we know, pinned down to this death language that they want us to speak like our first tongue. But it is a language without tone, a tongue of decaying and then dissipating spirit. There are days when the songs of my dead seem to be the only notes that people trace with fascination, a morbid savoring that ignores anything that helped someone like me live. This body of mine is alive, a product of being hugged, shared laughter, the dismantling of so called textbooks. When you break me down to a product that purchases so many consumable goods, cuts down my life, and blames me for having babies too young, there is some equation where my pennies that I make add up to someone else's vacation in Antibes, and their children might reference it easily in a published poem. My poems must talk about the anglings of flesh in cell phone cameras, once breathing, then red, still. I must be fascinated with my own death, subsumed in grief I did not build. This sort of death is not old age, diet, smoking, alcohol, or drugs. This sort of death falls short of cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. It is not accident. Accidents require fewer bullets. Accidents are not just that call that startles you out of sleep. Accidents are never systematic, repetitive, and unloaded daily. Accidents do not extinguish parents in front of children, nor do they swing the pendulum toward a skin that catches a glinting sun in a whole other character. No, this is the deliberate swing of phone books, pulled triggers, and drop hammers. This is the dragging of bodies into warehouses to say, look at how they kill each other. This is the shaking of heads that say, look at their report cards, sex lives, and past records. This is the editors who will ask you, can they publish another poem about your dead? because your nihilism is spiced just right with hot sauce from your bag and some peach cobbler from the black restaurants that don't survive in rejuvenated neighborhoods. This is the pain that no one wants to find in a hymnal because the chorus points at who is holding the gun instead of the dead on the floors, in the graves, and left on the streets of America, a country known for its jagged hurts waiting in its buck knife. Don't expect less from a two-sided blade ever. This is a history routed to eliminate, dim any charge that jumps clear off grid. Some seem to forget how I am a daily observer of electricity.
Wow. That, like, just the way in which you paint a picture through words. I'm like, this is not a question that I, wrote, but I'm going to start with this question that I just came up with. And
Okay.
hearing how you deliver your words, how do you come up with the imagery? Like, what is your writing process? Because just the way in which, like, the way in which you select words, like, it's very meticulous, and just the I with everything you read, I see things. I see things. So I'm like, ooh, I'm just curious. What is your writing? Like, take us through, like, how do you come up with your work?
Um, I read a lot.
Yes.
I hate to, I feel like it sounds so reductive and so simple, but I was telling some writers today, I'm like, you read a lot, but it's like you start to make these connections between things, right? And poets do a lot of juxtaposition. You're doing a lot of stuff where it's like maybe a verb is used in an unconventional way, or you create this imagery where you anthropomorphize an animal and make it more like a person, or you take a plant and you make it start to talk to people, or you
Yeah.
do something strange, like a little bit strange. And there's moments in that poem that I think are a little bit strange, or there's moments where I get a little bit slangy
Mhm.
because, and probably because it really makes me mad because I think I was thinking a lot about how publishers have so much say over what a black voice can look like.
Mm.
What can a black voice put out to the public? And we don't really talk about that because, you want to get published.
Right.
Um, but I think about that. It's like, what are the narratives that we hear again and again and again, right? Or I think about a book like Richard Wright had a novel that just got released that couldn't get released during his lifetime because it was about the very things that we're talking about with the police now, and a man who is killed by the police and what happens after the fact. I
Oh,
can't remember
wow.
the name of it, but it's in my TBR stack right now. Um, I'm looking to see what it is. But I think about that. It's like, how many times have we say we need these stories. We need we need black superheroes, we need black science fiction, we need black horror, and we're seeing all this stuff now, which is very profitable, I might add.
Hmm.
Um, but when, it's like, where were the resources to make this happen a long time ago? And people were saying they couldn't make any money off of making those stories.
Right.
And why? We know why, you know. So now it makes an extreme amount of money, and now it's popular and it's everywhere. But I also doubt the quality of it. Like, I was recently teaching James Baldwin's Notes of a Native Son to some
Mm.
undergraduates, and he really did not like Carmen Jones.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite movies, but I see why he didn't like it, right? Because if you compare it with, there was another Marilyn Monroe movie that came out the same year in 1954. And stylistically, they're dressed the same, they move the same, they sing, they're very musical movies. Um, but the roles that they give them are very different. Like basically Carmen Jones is poor and working class people.
Mm.
Marilyn Monroe's movie, which I cannot remember the title, they're all upwardly mobile. They have leisure time. The men are wearing suits, and you can tell their class positioning is very different. And it's like, why don't we get to see, not that Black people all have to be rich and famous and powerful in these movies, but it's always a position that's lower than the elite, you know?
Yes.
So I think about that a lot. Like, I don't know if there's an ideal positioning in this culture because we've never had a variety of stories.
That is true. Because actually, that's one of the reasons why. And I don't read romance novels, but Jasmine Guillory, I can read her stuff like this, and I'm like,
Hmm.
and and I'm like, I see myself. I'm a Black professional. Now I'm middle class after growing up working class, and it's like I see myself at the work, and also I love that she does something different with the genre. But
Yeah.
you're right. It's like, and again, I have so many questions about voice and about whose stories
Hmm.
you particularly selected to be in this text. So I'm
Hmm.
gonna skip around. So like one of the you mentioned this like as you were talking in terms of like publishing what publishers want and things like that. One of the things that I admire about you is that you've been able to move across various audiences and various like delivery points in terms of poetry. So you've done spoken word and you're also published.
Hmm.
So I'm curious, how has your writing style evolved since beginning your writing career, given that you have been able to toggle between spoken word, which is particular, at least for me, particular use of the language that you typically don't see on the printed page, but
Right.
then you've published.
Yeah. Um, I started to publish early in my spoken word career, whatever that means. I feel like it's all poetry. All good poetry lives in a voice, you know, like we can read Keats and Shakespeare and Walt Whitman, all the good dead white men, right? And and if you know how to read and you know what the voice is telling you, it comes to life. And they didn't have open mics. They didn't have, you know,
Oh Lord.
you know, and I think about that too, like that across the world for centuries in many different cultures, there have always been spoken traditions. Always. You know, when I first started teaching young people, I was still doing poetry slams and I would teach sections of this book called Sacred Sound, which was like a little new age book that came out with an orange cover. But it talked a lot about the power of chant, the power of mantras, and also how there was this whole culture, you know, of just people having competitive storytelling or verbalizing these things. And in African traditions, we know that's not an unusual thing, like the history of the praise poem and all of that. So I'm just like, is it really new or is it a dichotomy that's set up because the West needs those kinds of things?
Mm.
You know, and if I hadn't had the undergraduate education that I had, where we read Cheikh Anta Diop and we talked about the two cradle theory, I would have never thought of that. But I was like, yeah, everything is always this versus that. Or even like one of my favorite poetry podcasts, what was it? The title of it is called Verses.
Wow.
And I love that podcast. Um, but I also think about that, like why do we always have to be in competition where it's one thing against the other and it
Right.
negates everything in the middle or everything that's a little quirky or off the beaten path of those two things, you know? And I think
Mhm.
that's been part of my challenge too. It's like it wasn't just being somebody who did spoken word and written work in the page versus stage battles days of poetry that we saw in the 90s and the early aughts a lot. But, you know, I grew up in the Midwest, and it's always like the Midwest versus the coast. Or, you know, you
Mhm.
think about, do you go to the elite schools, or are you not matriculated into a university at all? Or,
Right.
you know, for me personally, it's like, even racially and culturally, it's like I have a white mother who came from French Canadian immigrants, and my father was a brother who grew up in Illinois. And you know, my grandparents came from like Cairo, Illinois, and Tennessee.
Wow. Wow.
I'm a weird mix of things, and I think, you know, if you think about what intersectionality could do, like that's what America is gonna look like. Not that it'll look like me, but you know, you think about it, it's like we have all the cross pollinations that make us possible.
Yes.
And I think that's going to make for more interesting storytelling. We're going to pull from different traditions and different influences.
And that's a really good segue to talk about your book because I think your book does that. So, the first question that I have about Refuse to Disappear is about the title. The title is extremely profound. When I hear Refuse
Mhm.
to Disappear, I think of people like me. I'm a black queer fat woman. I'm be all up in your face. What is the story behind the title, and what is Refuse to Disappear's origin story?
Um, I thought about a lot of things. At first, I thought I was going to write a book about Black women in science fiction, which is
Oh,
which is how Uhura ended up in the book, and I just really wanted to publish that poem in the book. Um, but there were other ones. I was thinking about Black women in comic books, and you know, I said I really need some time with that. Um, a couple of those poems ended up in The Future of Black, which is an anthology that Gary Jackson, Len Lawson, and Cynthia Manick edited together, and it's really cool. I like that book a lot.
mhm.
Um, but I noticed when I started gathering the poems up, it's like there was almost like this suite of poems about Black women. Then there was a suite of other poems where it's like this, you know, these other kernel of tenderness, and then the stuff I was writing about prisons and policing. And it just kind of fell together that way. The more I kind of arranged and sequenced things, and I said, this is probably the book,
Mm.
you know, because I didn't want any of those people to disappear. I want them to be visible. I want them to be talked about. And um, I had heard the phrase before, and particularly that phrase at one point in time, if you're a woman over 40, there were women over 40 talking about, I refuse to disappear. And I said, oh, well, that fits my demographic.
Right, it fits mine too.
Yeah, we're not. Really?
I just turned 43.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
It's a good moisturizer.
Uh-huh. Yep, and good genes. Yes.
But yeah. So I think about all of that, but the title of the book, it was really inspired by the last poem in the book. Um, in particular, there was a poet that I used to talk to a lot online named Eric Priestley. And he was one of the instrumental folks in terms of starting the Watts Writers Workshops.
Oh,
And he
wow.
just befriended me on Facebook, and he would tell me all these stories, and he would joke around with me. And there's videos of him online doing interviews and readings and stuff. There's not a lot of them, but there are a few. Um, and I was so excited. I wanted to tell him about this book when I knew it was about to be published, and he died before I could tell him.
Oh, wow.
So I've been telling everybody about him. Maybe it'll help put some of his work back into print. He published a few, God, has it been 10 years? It's been some years, but he published his novel For Keeps a while ago. And I have a copy of it. I also have a novel he published in the 70s called Raw Dog, which
Wow.
it looks like it has one of these black exploitation looking covers. I'm wondering, is it on the shelf here? I can't see it. Ah, I would show it to you, but I don't see.
Yeah.
It is. I'm peeking.
Yes.
Uh, it's such a mess in here, but I'm getting better about it. I
It
don't,
looks very well organized.
it, for the most part, some parts of it are. This is actually my fiction section. The one that's behind my back is mostly nonfiction. Ah,
Just the fact that you can say that you organize your library like that. My library is on this shelf was this box of books. I can't remember what was in
yeah.
it. Have fun looking through the shelf to see what you can find.
Yeah, so I don't. This is the Eric Priestley book I have from the 70s. So
Wow.
you know it's got that throwback cover.
Yup. I was like, that looks very throwback slash
And
black
it's got
exploitation.
you got the little narrative on the bottom, the unforgettable tale of a young man's maturing, his learning about love deep in Louisiana and about violence and death on the streets of Los Angeles. That's what it says.
Yes.
Well, yeah, Eric was good people, man. I really wish we had had more time to talk, but
Yeah.
I'm really glad that this book kind of is out there, and hopefully it makes people go look him up.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna look him up, especially with that cover. I'm like, I need to.
I can't remember where I found this. I was just like, oh my god, I found someplace that had it, and it says it was like 325 when it came out, and this is in really good condition.
Mm.
Like it's in better condition than some books I've bought 20 years ago. I was like, dang.
Dang. Yeah, because the cover looks all pristine. It looked like it was just printed.
Nah, girl, if you look at it, you can tell. Like, but you got me thinking about okay, so the book by Richard Wright, now that I'm
Yes.
thinking of novel summaries, and I summarized it earlier, was called The Man Who Lived Underground. So,
Oh.
and it's got this kind of black cover with orange and yellow letters on it. But I feel like I'm forever. I have a bad book buying problem too, so I need to slow down and read more of the books I'm actually buying right now.
Yes. So the next question I have for you is I think of poetry collections similarly to museums where a curator wants to take audiences through a particular experience. Given its specific curation, can you talk about how the poems and the order they are in were selected?
Well, I think I definitely wanted the black women in the book to be first. That was the main thing. I knew that before I knew anything else. And I think the rest of the book kind of like follows with what are some of the moments of tenderness that I would love to see other women experience or even myself. Um or things that I would like to see cared for. Like there's a little cluster of poems about the environment in the book. Um then I just found myself thinking about how much I loved hip hop and music and um how music is so integral to me just feeling alive.
Yeah.
Um and then by the time I got to the end of the book it was kind of like folding some of those things into talking like I said about prisons and policing and then refuse to disappear is kind of the poem that you know it's like we can get distracted and waylaid by all these obstacles that are put in our path. But what happens when you start to look above the obstacles or you keep finding ways around them? And I
Mhm.
think as a writer, that's kind of how I live my life. It's like you hear a lot of no's, you hear a lot of rejections, even if people think you're quote unquote successful. So if you keep hearing rejections, what do you do to circumvent the obstacle? What do you do?
Right.
Oh, you gonna say no? Somebody will say yes.
Mhm.
And you
Right.
keep going, right? And it's hard to sustain that. I think it is, but you know, I mean I feel like that's life. Like that you adjust, but you keep moving.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. Like right now through my COVID cough.
Oh, oh. So please be patient with Nicole. She's been sick. I'm so glad she could talk to me.
I've been sick. Like I tested positive for COVID September 26th, and I was only testing positive that 5-day period. Then I had like a week of a break, and then like that 2 weeks after, it's been pure fucking hell. Like I lost my
Right.
voice for a week, then I got sinus infection and bronchitis, and then now I have a cough that nothing helps. People recommended like herbal remedies, things at home. I got prescription codeine, I got Tessalon pearls, things that's supposed to stop a cough. My cough was like, no, bitch. No,
Mm-hmm.
bitch. I'm here. No, bitch. I ain't leaving. I ain't leaving at all. You gonna deal with me until I am ready to leave.
Your
I'm like,
cough.
I want to evict and rebuke you right now.
I'm just picturing your cough singing like Jennifer Hudson.
Yes.
And I'm telling you.
Yes.
Nowhere.
My God, yes. I'm just like, she throwing shoes at me. You gonna love me. Falling on the floor like Patti LaBelle. I'm just like, oh my God, I can't with this cough, but I'm gonna make it through. Like this cough will be gone. I'm hoping soon. And yeah.
No, I was just thinking. One of my friends told me he went to go see Patti LaBelle years ago. Talking about she lost her shoes in the audience.
Yes.
She had like a business card holder with her initials on it. She threw that into the audience. She just throwing stuff. I was like, Patti, what are you doing?
You're like, did anybody get hurt?
You just giving away all the accessories. What's going on?
Right. Like that would be that's worth a lot of money. Like, what do you do? Can we hand you back your stuff?
That's what I would be like. I'd be like, sis.
Here's your Louis Vuitton's back. Here's your.
But I have seen her kick the shoes. I'd be like, ma'am.
Yes.
I'm sorry, we're being totally silly now.
But you should hear some of my other episodes. Like because I'm like, this is a space. Like this is a space where I want people to be like, oh, like, and it's just like how I want to, challenge the canon. It's like, like what is it? This is why I'm like I tell people, like, one of the reasons why I'm independent as this podcast is I want people to curse. I want people to not censor themselves. I'm like, no, this is the space for us to do that. It's called Black Writers Read for a reason. It's not called, like Black Writers sponsored by blah, 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 blah reads. I'm
yeah. I will admit, though, I really don't curse on social media and in public interviews. Like, if you know me in real life, you might get a very different story. But I kind of avoid that because I've been teaching in so many different settings.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want somebody to decide we're going to use Tara's interview as a teaching tool. And then they hear me talk like grown folks is the only people in the room.
Yes.
Maybe I've had a shot of bourbon and I don't.
Yes.
This is water. I promise you it's water.
Yes. She's like, I promise you it's water. And as you take the sip of water, I'm going to prep my next question.
Yes.
There are specific poems that reference voice, its power, and its absence, along with paying homage to Black women who were the first in their realms, who some are now with the ancestors. Why was it important to include women like Nina Simone, the band TLC, Lieutenant Uhura from Star Trek, and Solange Knowles, mentions of these women in this collection?
Oh my gosh. I mean, not so much Solange, but I think a lot of those women, I discovered them or at points in my life when I needed them. Or with the case of Nichelle Nichols, she was in the background of my childhood. My mother was a Star Trek fan. She was a huge science fiction fan. And I just remember I wasn't really into it because when your mother likes things, you don't want to like what your mother likes.
Yup.
So it took me a while to get to Star Trek and Emily Dickinson because she liked that. And Luther Vandross, which I'm ashamed to say, It took me some time. And then once I got a little bit grown and I was like off on my own, I was like, damn, Luther Vandross can sing.
Yep.
And I realized I knew all those songs because she played them all the time. But
Wow.
yeah, but with Star Trek in particular, I think other than Nichelle Nichols was just so beautiful and so assertive on the screen in ways that I really admired. And I read this story in a couple of places that Martin Luther King told her she had to stay on the show.
Yep.
And I mention it in one line of the poem. And, you know, a lot of people talk about George Takei, who I also mentioned in the poem about him being a survivor of the internment camps.
Yeah.
And so I had those two core thoughts in my mind. And I said, I think I need to write this poem because they never talk about their race on the show.
No.
They never do, which was kind of the blessing because, you know, you can tell they look at them like peers. They don't look at them racially, which is probably
Yeah.
one of the genius things about Star Trek. Um, but for everybody else who was watching it when it was a new show, it was a racial thing. And we still see that a lot now in science fiction and comic book culture when they get mad about representations of Black people becoming popular or that they're politicizing these narratives. Like, why are, you know, the Dora Milaje gay? And I was like, why couldn't they be?
Right.
You know? And why would they want to mess with men when they got to go into battle with their sisters?
Right.
Like that makes sense to me. It's not my jam, but it makes sense to me. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Like the Little Mermaid. Oh my God. I'm like, I don't know whose tweet this was, but they were like, you know, those who were enslaved as they were crossing, you know, the Middle Passage on boats, they
Mhm.
were jumping or thrown in the water. What did you expect for a mermaid to look like if you have all of those black
Yes.
souls in the water? I was like,
Girl, I saw that tweet too, and I was like,
yeah.
mhm. I think there's an interview somewhere where I read that tweet
Oh
because
wow.
you know. But then there are also Black folk tales about Black mermaids. We have Mami Wata, and if you think about Yemaya and the Yoruba tradition, like the Black mermaid ain't no new thing. Why?
No.
Or even what was that television show where they were capturing the mermaids and it came out, it was on Hulu. I saw it on Hulu.
Oh.
And there was one white mermaid and she could well, the mermaids could transform once they were on land. They could painfully develop two legs. And then when they got back in the water, they could rejoin into their mermaid form. Um,
Wow.
but they were on the coast of like Seattle or somewhere in this fishing town. And the secret is, you know, the mermaids had been there for centuries and nobody was talking about it. It was a secret. And
Oh.
they were, you know, it was kind of cool. But this one mermaid comes to town because she's basically telling them, look, your fishing industry is going to shut down. We're getting closer to you because we're running out of food. So it had like this environmental subtext to it. But the mermaid had a sister. Guess what her sister looked like?
One of us?
Yeah. She's black woman, long black hair, but clearly a sister. And so you're like, okay, all right, not a big stretch. Like, you know, if you go to some black family reunions, they'd be like, yeah, that's my cousin over there. You know. But I
Right.
think the way it was such a show, the way they put it out there, I bet you there were some people going, why does she have a black mermaid sister?
Right. I hate to do this, but we need to do a quick interlude, which I've never done on Black Writers Read because of my cough.
Oh
So
dear.
I need a minute and I'm going to come back on camera. I am so sorry. Yes,
Well,
I will be back like in 1 minute.
okay, so we will take a brief intermission.
I am back. I was in the middle. A really bad coughing fit was starting. And I was like, why is this happening? Oh, you're muted. Oh, Tara, you are muted.
Good, because my phone made noise.
Yes.
But yes, thank you to everybody who sat tight with us for a minute. And thank you, Nicole, for
Yes.
toughing it out to make this happen.
Yes, because I've been waiting for this conversation. I've been waiting for it for so long. I have a couple more questions before we wrap up this evening.
Yes. And the TV show was called Siren. They only did 3 seasons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But there's a whole series of children's books, and there's this collection of folk tales that Virginia Hamilton did called Her Stories. And in it, there is
Wow.
definitely like big images of like these beautiful black mermaids. It's so cool.
Nice.
So yeah, it ain't new. They just picking on Chloe.
Mhm.
They picking on Chloe.
You said they're picking on Chloe.
They need to leave that girl alone. She can't do the silhouette challenge. She can't sing her little songs about 20 something relationships. Now she can't be a mermaid. Like, leave her alone.
Yes.
You know?
Oh my gosh. So the next question that I have is, our environments and communities can inform our creative practice. I didn't realize you were a native of Chicago until we talked earlier today.
Pretty
So,
much.
yeah,
I
how
grew up
much?
in Kankakee. So
Oh, what's that?
I grew up in Kankakee, Illinois, which is just south of Chicago. But
Wow.
as an 18-year-old, I came to Chicago and made this my adult home.
Yes. So, how much has your adult home of Chicago influenced your work?
It's been everything. Everything. Um, I think it expanded my reading, it expanded my community. I met people from all over the world in all these different ethnic and racial communities when I came here. And it fed me. It inspired me. It stimulated me as a writer and let me know that there was so much to talk about, even more than I ever imagined. And I just, I think the first weekend I came to Chicago, I went to Loyola University for my undergrad experience. And the first thing I remember doing, um, I went to Cudahy Library, which the building that I went to is still there. It's still intact. They've added on to it. And I went in there recently and it just felt like this hush came over me because I remembered being there as a young undergraduate, going to the library, and I found the Black section,
Oh,
which if you go into E185 for the
yes.
for the people who do Library of Congress, that's where all the Black books were. And I remember just sitting on the floor and being in awe. Like there's more Black books than I ever thought there were. And
Yes.
just sat on the floor and I pulled like stacks of stuff down and I was just reading on the floor that weekend, the first weekend I was in college. And, I know that's not a sexy idea to a lot of people now, but it was very it made me happy. It gave me this window that there was a lot to explore, you know?
Mhm. Wow. And speaking of that, and reading, and you're such an avid reader, this is a particular question I ask of all of our Black readers guests. What are
Mhm.
some possibilities and limitations of your particular genre? And what do we owe to both ourselves and our readers by delivering our messages through our chosen genre? And for you, it's poetry.
The limitations of poetry. That I think one of the main limitations is that everybody thinks it's inaccessible and it's difficult to read and as it's not as valuable or prescient as fiction or nonfiction.
Mhm.
And to me, it's like the shorthand for all of these other genres. And I've seen so many poets step from poetry into everything else, be it fiction, nonfiction, dramatic writing for the stage and film, or even radio, like National Public Radio, like Al Letson was a
Mm.
slam champion. And then he went on to win Peabody Awards and do stuff on NPR, and I'm like, he probably wouldn't have gotten to that if he hadn't thought about performance, if he hadn't thought about, you know, writing to tell a story through poetry slams,
Mm.
right? So I think about people like that have been in my circles. Um, I think about how people continue to downgrade it. Particularly now, I'm tired of that debate where people say, is poetry dead? And I'm like, it's miraculous that poetry is supposedly dead as soon as it becomes more diverse.
Mm.
As soon as you have more Black people doing it and more people have stepped out of slam and they're getting major book contracts, and, it's like, now it's dead?
Wow.
Really? That when really all we're doing is some of the same work that Dana Gioia claimed to do when he came out with his book, Can Poetry Matter? Like, when I read that book, I was like, homie, you talking about doing all the stuff that I'm doing as a teaching artist right now.
Wow.
And when I realized that essay was looking at people who were already in the establishment in terms of academia and these major publishing circles, those, I think it's positing, and I may be wrong, maybe Dana will at some point see this interview and correct me, but I think he might have been positing that the people who were already in the academy should be doing this work, and I would challenge that.
Oh.
Um,
Wow.
but I just wish for me financially, um, that it was a little less challenging to create poetry. And I have some of my former students telling me, they're like, Dr. Tara, Miss Tara, you need to put out some fiction. You need to be on TikTok. You need to go write nonfiction. And
Nope.
it's not that I don't want to. Like, I've been writing essays. I have an idea for a short story collection, and I have an idea for a memoir. Like, I have a lot of things in the can that I'm just in those very nascent stages of finishing or starting them. So it's not that I don't think about it, but I think because I was so ingrained in that poetry trajectory, it's kind of slowed me down a little bit because, you know, people don't, people are very funny about hiring poets.
That's interesting.
Like, there's a very small cadre of people who get all the gigs that actually help sustain you. So I think that makes people kind of go into other genres too, as the money's not there.
Mm. Yeah, because I'm learning a lot about publishing because I consider myself still an emerging writer. And when I heard that, like, in some instances, poets don't get paid when they're like a poem is published in a literary journal, or they even have to pay to be in there, or even, like
Which I don't
book
do.
deals.
I'm not paying nobody to post.
Right.
Like,
Oh,
that defeats the purpose. I mean, you may pay to promote the book, you may pay postage to send certain things out, you may pay a publicist, you may pay for a website, you may pay to do your initial kickoff events. But to pay to publish, no.
yeah, because I've seen so many things where because I haven't submitted in a long time where like you have to pay a $10 reading fee to be considered. And I'm like, and then you don't get copies of the journal if you're published. I'm like,
Mm-mm.
where they do that at? Make it
At,
make sense.
yeah, at minimum, and this is, writing advice that everybody should get. At minimum, you should receive contributors' copies. At
Mm.
minimum. Like, they may offer you a very small stipend for a poem. That's pretty common. But, you have to get into those higher markets like Poetry Magazine to really make money off of a poem. Or maybe
Wow.
you're in an anthology that's on a major press, like, let's say it's Norton, or, a book, a publisher that has a very good catalog and good distribution, and, you know, maybe they publish other major writers. then you got a shot at negotiating some money. But they don't pay you a lot for even anthologies. Sometimes you might make $100 off a poem that's printed in an anthology if you make good money off of it.
Wow, all the things I'm learning. Oh my god.
Yeah. And I think, and that's, you mentioned Lisa Pegram earlier. That's one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is how much of the arts is a show, right?
Yeah.
It's a performance where people think people are doing so well, and really they're struggling to pull everything together. It's kind of like that moment where Lauryn Hill is talking about Disneyland on Unplugged, where everybody said Lauren was falling apart. I'm like, no, Lauren probably was making more sense than what people think, because she's talking about people in entertainment. Everything looks like Disneyland up front. It's
It does.
clean, it's happy, it's colorful. Da, 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 da. Then you go in the back where the break room is, and Mickey is
Yes.
cigarette.
Yes.
Dirty and run down, and you're like, it's a show.
It's like Target for me, that analogy you gave. Like Targets, I will go in, everything is set up nice, and then I'm like, if I have to go to the bathroom, I'm like, oh no. Every Target I have been in, their bathrooms look like the Tasmanian devil just went in there and it's always the same mess. They tear down rolls of toilet paper. Toilets haven't been flushed in like 4 or 5 uses. I'm like, there's like a wet stain sign out. Every Target is the same. And I'm like,
I gotta admit, I haven't seen that in the Chicago Target, so I'm a little appalled.
Yes.
Because the one in Back of the Yards, I've been to that one. There's one in Wicker Park. There's one here in Hyde Park. The bad thing is that the one here in Hyde Park is on 53rd Street, and it's the most southbound Target.
Oh.
So there was one that was further south, and they were doing really good business, but they shut it down. And I suspect it was probably in an empowerment zone, and when the empowerment zone money ran out, they decided to withdraw, because it wasn't that people weren't shopping there. They just decided, well, we don't want to be this far south anymore.
Wow.
And I was just like, I think it makes it very hard for money to stay in Black neighborhoods in Chicago when things like that happen.
Wow.
Because if you have one of those major businesses, it can make it seem more amenable for other businesses to open around it.
Yes.
But you know what world we live in. I'm just gonna put it like that.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. Did anybody have questions? I'm wondering about that. Or did you have other
Yeah.
questions?
So, excuse me.
Yeah, take a moment.
I'm moderating the chat, and there's no questions that have come through. I do
Okay.
have one last question for you.
Yeah.
So, as an educator who has worked both in community-based programs and in university classrooms, what is your duty to your students and to the subjects that you teach? And what do you hope your students gain from studying with you and hopefully reading your work?
Well, I don't really push students to read my work. I don't.
Mm.
I might tell them, I'll be like, look, I got a book out. If you want to come to the reading, you can. But I'm not going to. I feel like that's to sell to my students just doesn't feel right sometimes.
Yeah.
So I don't like doing that. But what I do is I tell them, I'm like, I want you, if we're talking about writing, I want you to cultivate your own voice. I'm just here to give you the tools to help you get there in the way that makes sense for you. So I'll teach you the devices, I'll teach you structure. We'll look at writers from all over the place. We'll listen to stuff. We'll look, we'll watch videos. We'll read. But I want you to question things.
Yes.
Like, question what you read, question me, but don't just sit there. And I think we're in an interesting point in the culture where it's like, okay, we may have really gifted students who want to be writers, but
Mm,
we're also in a culture where there are students who think if they get the credential, that's all they have to do. And I'm like, no, they've taught you how to be an automaton and to be
mm.
entertained by the computer in your pocket. And
Yes.
and I'm like, you don't even ask why, about anything. Or
Wow.
I've had classes where sometimes I'll be like, well, what do you think about this? And everybody just stares at me. Or
Oh.
what connections do you make? And I don't know, maybe it's because I'm getting older as an educator. And I think when you get older as an educator, you're no longer cool like Big Sis. You're like somebody's mama running your mouth.
Yes.
you know, um, but there's something to be said for just being like, look, this may be the only time you get to have adventures in your life. This may be the only
Mm.
time where you can openly and blatantly critically question something or go deeper with it and analyze it. And I'm trying to push them to do that so that they can put the dots together a little bit sooner than when you go out in the world and life hits you in a hard way. Right.
Yes.
And you're wondering what do you do to manage and maintain once it's kind of like that moment in the Matrix
Yes.
after you take the pill, right? And you're traumatized by that. And nobody told you it was coming. Nobody gave you a tool. They didn't even show you how to do the thing where you're dodging the
Yes.
bullets. I'm like, I want to try to show you how to dodge the bullet a little bit.
Yeah. Yes.
So, it's a trite metaphor for some now, but I hope that, like I said, I'm giving them critical tools. So even if they never write a poem or never publish a story,
Mm.
they can look at not just literature, but the world and realize how language is important and empowering.
Mm.
And it can shift the ways people think, right?
Yes, this is why I love reading and why I also love talking to writers, writers who are educators, because they understand language as a part of culture and language as the device and the
Mhm,
power of language. So, oh,
mhm.
oh my gosh. Like
Yeah,
yeah, you and I, yeah, I hope to connect with you again. Well, I know I will. I'm like,
yeah, I would love that, and I want you to
yes,
get better, and I'm so glad there's there's talk in the culture about that now, like, what is it? Trisha Hersey just came out with that book, Rest is Resistance, and then,
yes,
Octavia Rahim has her book, Pause, Rest, Be, and
yes.
there's another book called Black Fatigue, and I've been thinking about all of that a lot because, I've had my share of health problems too. I mean, it doesn't show. I think I'm one of those people who's resistant to letting people see the weakness, but
Mm,
um I'm seeing how I have to treat myself more tenderly to survive.
yeah.
And it's not just rest, it's not just diet, it's not just exercise. It's like, are you doing your body work? Are you meditating? You know, are you making time to unplug from the
Yeah.
world and all this stimuli that can be too much?
Yeah, and you're right. And I think this is the reason why why I've just progressively gotten worse because I have not been resting. I have not taken time off due to COVID because of just the jobs and industries that I work in and just the pace of the capitalist calendar. So, but
Yes.
I'm like, yeah, because I bet any amount of money, if I just like have a couple of days of doing absolutely nothing, I will be
Mhm.
myself again and COVID will be gone. Like,
And you got to do that. And I mean, it's hard because you don't want to lose your job, you don't want to be
right.
disciplined, and you don't want people to think you're not on top of your game. But I'm like, you know, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to kill ourselves in order to? I don't agree with that either.
Right.
I'm not killing myself. And in particular for Black women, I feel like, and I think I might have mentioned this to you before we got online, I feel like we can do so much work. Women in particular, we can do so much work where you're basically like Ginger Rogers in the Fred Astaire equation, where, yeah, you do everything Fred does, but you do it in high heels and you do it backwards.
Oh, wow.
So I'm
Yeah.
not interested in doing all of that. And then you say, oh, you know what? You should do this project that no one's getting paid for. And then they have to do 10 additional hours to do it. I don't want to be that person. I want to be the person who gets paid more money for doing half the hours.
Mhm.
And then I can spend that time doing, research or publication, or maybe I can spend time with some of my former students who want to come visit and want to talk to me about building their own projects. I don't want to do,
Mm.
you know, I'm trying to figure out, since our mortal coil is finite,
Yeah. Yeah.
how can you spread some stuff out so you can do that creative work that you want to leave behind? And I plan on being here a long time, but I want to economize my time as best as I can too.
Yeah. And I need to hear that because I'm like, right now I'm doing like the most. Like when we last connected, I was in immersive weekend for my doctoral program and we were like workshopping
Mhm.
14, 16 hours. And I'm like,
That's a
how is
lot.
this sustainable?
Mm. And you're in, so this is for people who might watch this later. If you're in a PhD program, no one will tell you to take a rest.
Yep.
And it programs you to basically be one of those people like, you never do enough. You will never do enough.
Yeah.
And imagine you go and you get a full-time tenure track job and you work in an environment where everybody has been taught you will never do enough. It's
Yeah.
like you are being pressed for all your juices in academia like it's another corporate machine. And no
Yeah.
one needs that. Not even other academics. You can't do good work if
Yeah.
you're like that. There's a really interesting book called The Slow Professor.
Oh, wow.
And it's talking about that, like how in order to postulate new things to profess, we have to slow down.
Mhm.
You can't really create out of exhaustion
Wow.
and being like forced to work like a machine. You can't. We're not machines.
Yeah, we're not.
In a divine way, we may be extraordinary machines, but we're not built out of steel with nuts and bolts. You know,
Oh, I would not want to be. That sounds like Rosie from the Jetsons, and she
you
broke
know.
every once in a while.
And I
Yes.
always think about Fiona Apple in that song. She'll be like, "I'll make the most of it. I'm an extraordinary machine." It's
Oh
like the
God.
most. It's like one of her best songs, and, you know. But it's also talking about, you know, things change, things break down, and you adjust.
Yeah.
Machines can't adjust,
Yeah. Right.
you know. So maybe we're extraordinary. Wouldn't that be something?
Right. Oh, and that is such a great way to end our conversation this evening. Dr. Tara Betts, thank you so much for your patience, for like helping
No
me through the
problem.
interlude that we had to do today.
You know. And thank you for tolerating my rambling. It was such a joy, such a pleasure. And I got to be a little zany. And I hope people will check out Refuse to Disappear and, the rest of the episodes of Black Writers Read.
Yes.
They can find me on Twitter at Tarbetts, Tarabetts. And I'm on Instagram at Tarbetts Chi-Town, which you put up on the screen. So I would love to see some of you there in social media land as well.
Yes. And thank you so much. I'm going to do some more housekeeping things and then we're going to wrap up. So thank you so much, Tara, for being here.
Thank you for having me and good night.
Good night. So thank you all again for toying with us tonight, especially those who stayed on the whole time, excuse me, I will be back on Sunday, November 6th with award-winning writer Desiree Cooper. We'll be talking about her debut children's book, Nothing Special, which was released earlier this month. Find me and more about Black Writers Read online at NicoleMYoung.com. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep up with episodes of both Black Writers Read and my other projects. Also, be sure to subscribe to the audio podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Essentially, I take the episodes, the live streams, and put them in the audio form so you can have them portable and listen to them at any time. So thanks to all of our viewers for spending your evening with us, and more importantly, for ensuring that Black authors continue to matter. Have a great evening.